For the first time in years, the atmosphere over the middle of the United States is about to do something it hasn't done in a long time, and it's going to keep doing it day after day for more than a week. We're talking about a relentless machine of severe thunderstorms, one that will spin out tornadoes, hurl damaging wind gusts strong enough to level trees, and dump so much rain that flash flooding becomes a genuine threat across multiple states. And while all of that unfolds in the Midwest and Ohio Valley, a massive dome of heat is expanding across the southern part of the country. And the quiet Atlantic Ocean has finally suddenly sprung to life. This is not an ordinary August, and by the end of this breakdown, you'll understand exactly why forecasters are calling this pattern something we simply haven't seen in 4 or 5 years. If tracking the forces behind our wildest weather is your thing, subscribe to W for Weather right now, because over the next week, there's going to be a lot to keep up with. Let's get into it. Let me start by explaining the single idea that makes sense of this entire week. There's a term meteorologists use for what's setting up right now, and it's called the Ring of Fire pattern. Here's what that actually means. A big dome of high pressure has planted itself over the southern plains, and that dome acts like a boulder sitting in a river. The fast-moving winds, high up in the atmosphere, the jet stream, can't push through it, so they're forced to flow up and over and around its northern edge. And that curving path around the top of the dome becomes a highway for storms. Disturbance after disturbance rides that highway from the high plains down through the Midwest and the Ohio Valley and into the Appalachians, firing off round after round of severe weather. The heat dome isn't shutting the storms down. It's steering them like a conveyor belt of thunderstorms circling its rim. That's the Ring of Fire, and it's why this threat doesn't clear out after a single day. So, let's walk through it, starting with today. Right now, there are 2 separate zones carrying an elevated severe weather risk. One stretching from central Illinois and the Chicago area eastward toward the mid-Atlantic, and another across parts of the northern plains. But around those, there's a truly enormous lower-tier threat covering over a dozen states where every hazard is on the table this afternoon and evening. We're talking about the potential for significant damaging wind gusts possibly reaching 70 to 75 mph, some very large hail, especially up in the Dakotas, and a broad corridor where a few tornadoes are possible. And I want to be honest with you about the tornado piece because this is where forecasting gets genuinely difficult. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw a strong tornado somewhere today. The problem is it's highly uncertain exactly where the highest tornado threat will materialize. I'm watching a couple of specific quarters, parts of Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and eastern Illinois, where the ingredients could come together for a slightly higher-end tornado potential. But that uncertainty is exactly why you can't just wait to see storms on the horizon. If you live anywhere in that broad zone, you need multiple ways to receive warnings today, including something that will alert you even if you're asleep, because some of the most dangerous storms in this pattern will fire after dark. Now, let me get more specific about the timing today, because there are 2 areas I'm watching closely. The first is near Lake Erie, where storms will fire this afternoon, and a couple could even form over the lake itself and move into northwestern Pennsylvania. Damaging wind is the main concern. But I'm also watching for an elevated tornado risk if any storms manage to stay discrete and isolated rather than clumping together. The reason is that a key measurement forecasters use to gauge tornado potential is forecast to spike in parts of southeastern Ohio. If a morning line of storms weakens and clears the air enough for the sun to destabilize the atmosphere, that tornado risk could climb, potentially producing a strong tornado. And later, as those storms keep overlapping and training over the same ground in eastern Ohio, the flooding risk ramps up right alongside the wind and tornado threat. At the same time, we have to keep an eye on the Midwest because there's a conditional but potentially significant threat around Chicago, Milwaukee, and Lafayette. Some high-resolution model guidance suggests a few supercells could fire around the early evening. And here's the key difference from recent days. This could happen before sunset when the atmosphere is at its most volatile and unstable. There's plenty of wind shear in that environment, so the tornado threat near Chicago would be elevated right alongside a damaging wind threat. Now, I do expect whatever fires near Lake Michigan to quickly organize into a line of thunderstorms, which tends to lower the overall tornado odds. But if a tornado or two does form before that upscaling happens, they could be strong. So, the Chicago area and northern Indiana are places to stay alert this evening. And here's the exhausting part for the folks in eastern Ohio and West Virginia. You're going to have wave after wave of rain because these storms keep training from northwest to southeast, essentially lining up and passing over the same communities repeatedly. That's the recipe for a significant flooding threat tonight, and it won't necessarily stop at midnight. Guidance keeps hinting at more storm activity around Chicago even after midnight, which could mean another round of tornado, wind, and flash flood threats. Then, overnight into Tuesday morning, yet another round of storms rolls across Columbus and Cincinnati. If you live in Ohio, these storms are going to feel almost non-stop. Let me pause here for a moment because I'm genuinely curious about your experience. For those of you in the Midwest and Ohio Valley, how are you preparing when you know severe weather is coming not just once but night after night for days on end? Drop a comment and share what works for you. Because I think in a stretch like this one, hearing how other people stay ready could genuinely help someone else in the comments who's feeling overwhelmed. Because here's the thing, that overnight activity is not even the whole story for the days ahead. Tuesday brings another large severe weather threat with an elevated risk zone running from the Chicago area all the way back into Kentucky and Virginia. Plus, that same sprawling lower-tier threat stretching from the mid-Atlantic into the northern plains. But Tuesday's headline hazard shifts. This time, the biggest concern is significant damaging wind, potentially 80 to 85 MPH gusts during the daylight hours from around Chicago back into West Virginia. There's an isolated large hail risk mainly up in the northern plains. And yes, a few tornadoes are possible, though I lean toward this being more of a straight-line wind event, with any tornadoes likely embedded within a line of storms rather than forming as isolated supercells. That's actually a critical distinction, because tornadoes hidden inside a fast-moving line of storms can be especially dangerous. They're hard to see coming, and they arrive with little warning. There will likely be a big line of storms firing in Wisconsin and Illinois late Tuesday morning, producing widespread damaging wind of 60 to 85 mph, and it'll only spread and intensify through the afternoon. That line will then push toward Virginia during the late evening and overnight into early Wednesday. And you probably already see where this is going, because Wednesday brings yet another round. There's a large, severe weather threat stretching from Nebraska all the way back toward Charlotte with damaging wind as the main concern. But large hail and a couple of tornadoes remain possible. This is the ring of fire in action. As long as that high-pressure dome sits parked over the southern plains, storms just keep slings hotting around its edge, and the severe threat simply refuses to go anywhere. And I really want to emphasize how unusual this is, because it's the heart of why this breakdown exists. If you live in the Ohio Valley or the Midwest, you're going to get tired of severe weather very, very quickly. Honestly, this is not a pattern we've seen much of over the last 3 or 4 years. There hasn't really been a stretch of sustained, elevated August severe weather like this, where day after day carries a genuine risk. This feels like the first time in maybe 4 or 5 years that the atmosphere has locked into something this persistent in the middle of August. And that's the deeper story here. It's not any single storm. It's the relentlessness. The sheer number of consecutive high-risk days driven by a pattern that has decided to dig in and stay. Let me show you why it's going to stay. That high-pressure dome over the southern plains is doing 2 jobs at once. First, it's cranking the heat higher and higher across the Great Plains and the South. Second, its position is locking in that storm conveyor's northern rim, and the models don't show it breaking down anytime soon. This storm train looks like it'll keep running across the Midwest and Ohio Valley, at least through Thursday, and there's a real chance it ramps right back up over the weekend. We could genuinely be looking at a solid week to 10 days of active weather, with elevated severe risk potentially lingering all the way toward the 20th of August as that dome refuses to budge. If we time it out a little further using the longer range guidance, the European model keeps things active across the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and back into the Central Plains through Thursday and Friday. This activity just isn't going anywhere. Late Friday into Saturday could get particularly interesting in the upper Midwest, with the potential for a more significant severe day centered over Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, capable of damaging winds, hail, and tornadoes. Then Saturday could bring yet another round, and you can probably guess the location by now: the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and into the Central Plains, with damaging wind gusts again the primary concern and tornadoes possible. By Sunday and Monday, the severe risk should finally start to shrink and get pushed toward the East Coast. Beyond that, honestly, the details get too murky to call with confidence. But one thing is clear: the next 7 days are going to be exceptionally active. Now, I want to be careful and fair here because forecasting a week out is inherently uncertain. The near-term days, today through Wednesday, I'm confident about the general threat. The weekend potential is a real signal, but the exact timing, location, and intensity of those later rounds will shift as we get closer. What I'm confident in is the overall pattern, not the pinpoint details of a storm 5 or 6 days out. That's the responsible way to read any long-range severe outlook. Let me shift now to the other half of the country, because while the North deals with storms, the South is dealing with the heat that's driving all of it. That dome of high pressure is the same feature pumping temperatures higher across the southern plains and the southeast. This is the kind of oppressive building heat that becomes a genuine health hazard, especially when it lingers day after day and the nights don't cool off enough to give people a break. If you're anywhere under that dome, treat the heat with the same seriousness as the storms up north. Hydrate constantly, avoid the hottest parts of the day, and check on the people around you who are most vulnerable: the elderly, young children, and anyone without reliable air conditioning. Heat is consistently one of the deadliest forms of weather, even though it never produces the dramatic footage that a tornado does. And then there's the third piece of this remarkable pattern, one that's been conspicuously absent for most of the summer. For the first time in what feels like forever, the tropics have finally woken up in the Atlantic. After a genuinely quiet start to the season with only a couple of weak-named storms and no hurricanes so far, the National Hurricane Center is now watching multiple areas for potential development. The one that stands out has around a 60% chance of forming over the next 7 days out in the central and eastern Atlantic. There are a couple of other areas being monitored too, with much lower odds. One east of the Lesser Antilles that will at least bring some rain to the islands, and another north of Bermuda. Let me give you my honest read on these. Most of these areas probably won't amount to much. They'll likely stay as weak, disorganized, low-pressure systems. But that one with a 60% chance is the one I think could actually become something real, likely developing into a tropical cyclone around Thursday or Friday. Here's the catch, though. Even if it does form, it's going to run into a lot of wind shear, which is the atmospheric force that tears developing storms apart. So, the odds of it rapidly strengthening into a monster near the islands this weekend are pretty low. Looking further out, some models take it very close to Bermuda early next week, while others essentially slingshot it out to sea, away from land. So, the practical bottom line right now is that there's a very low chance of any major impact to the United States. But, and this is the crucial part, it is hurricane season, and this is exactly the kind of system you keep watching until you know for certain it's headed harmlessly out to sea. And there's a broader lesson buried in here that's worth understanding. A lot of people assume that because the Atlantic has been so quiet and full of shear this summer, we're basically in the clear. That's a dangerous assumption. High wind shear reduces the odds of storms forming, but it does not make hurricanes impossible. In fact, seasons that stay unusually quiet for a long time can still produce a single powerful storm out of nowhere because all that ocean heat energy has just been sitting there waiting. It only takes one. Let me pull all three of these threads together because when you step back, the whole picture is genuinely fascinating, and it all traces back to that one dominant feature. The heat dome over the southern plains is the anchor. Its northern edge is spinning off round after round of severe storms across the Midwest and Ohio Valley, giving us this rare, sustained stretch of August severe weather we haven't seen in years. Its core is driving dangerous heat across the South. And out over the Atlantic, the season is finally stirring to life just as this whole continental pattern reaches its peak. Storms, heat, and now the tropics, all active at the same time. That's what makes this a week worth paying close attention to. Now, let me bring it back to you and what actually matters for your safety over the next several days. If you're anywhere in the Midwest or Ohio Valley, treat every afternoon, evening, and overnight period as a time to stay weather aware. Have more than one way to receive warnings and make absolutely sure at least one of them can wake you from sleep. Know where your safe spot is before a warning is issued, not after. If you're in one of the training storm zones like eastern Ohio or West Virginia, take the flooding threat as seriously as the wind. And remember the simplest life-saving rule there: never drive into water across a road. It takes a shockingly small amount of moving water to sweep a vehicle away. If you're under the heat dome in the south, the heat is your primary threat. Plan around it and look out for the vulnerable. If you're anywhere along the coast, there's no need to worry about that tropical system right now, but it's a good moment to make sure you know your hurricane plan. I also want to be straight with you about the uncertainty. The threats over the next 3 days are well supported, and I'm confident in the general danger even if the exact tornado hotspots are still fuzzy. The weekend's severe potential is a real and growing signal, but the specifics will change, and that tropical system is worth monitoring, not panicking over. As the days go on, some of these threats will sharpen while others fade, and I'll be here to update you every step of the way. Before I wrap up, I want to leave you with one more question for the comments. This kind of sustained ring of fire August pattern used to be more common, and we simply haven't had a stretch like it in years. So for those of you who've lived in the Midwest or Great Lakes for a long time, does this feel like a return to the kind of active summers you remember? Or does the weather where you live genuinely feel different than it used to? I find these first-hand perspectives genuinely valuable.